Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done it all, to stand. Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, which you will be able to quench the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. And for me, that utterance may be given to me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, that I may speak it boldly as I ought to speak.
Makan sana punati. Oh iya Ramadan aja. Mana era miseria mana? Hakikat si pun kamar rawat. Gua ada. Madonna. Si makan punati.
wondering if they should download and use the COVID Aware app. It's important to understand what it is and what it isn't.
COVID Aware NN is an app that notifies you if you've been near someone who tested positive for COVID-19.
But it is no longer considered digital contact tracing.
It's not called that anymore for good reason. It's now called exposure notification because the information is not being shared with public health, which would allow contact tracing to happen. It's only staying on your phone, and it's only then anonymously being pushed out to alert other phones that individuals have been exposed. So it's really residing with the individual.
Jeff Kahn has been studying the technology for months as director of the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics. This spring, his team drafted ethical guidelines for states considering adding the technology.
Is there any evidence that this technology has helped?
It's too early to answer that question. So the short answer is we don't know yet. The longer answer is we're working on it, and we will continue to work on it in the coming weeks and months.
Kahn says Ireland credited similar technology with helping to manage its first wave of COVID cases, but roughly a third of the population downloaded it. In the U.S., early adopting states struggled to reach even 10%. But he says many initial questions about safety and privacy have been answered, and it's also become easier to download and use.
I will tell you, in Maryland, where I live now, we have had it now for a few weeks, and I turned it on my iPhone, and I've not yet gotten a ping, but I think, it's a helpful way for people to know if they have been exposed and if they test positive to alert others that they have been exposed.
COVID Aware NN is free through the App Store and Google Play. It doesn't track your location or share your identity. The more people who download the app, the better it works.
Do we know if it will work if only, say, 10 to maybe 30% of people use it?
We don't know yet how many people, within a community it will take to actually have a big public health effect. We're trying to study that, but I don't think just because a small proportion of the population is using it means it won't be effective at all.
That's because when used with actual contact tracing, masking, and distancing, it can add another level of protection.
I think of it as an additional tool. If you think about all the tools in the toolbox, this is just another. And the more tools we have, I think the better off we'll be. And certainly, it's all a bridge to getting us to a vaccinated population where we're all protected and can go back to whatever our normal lives look like.
Now, Jeff says this technology actually goes so far out of the way to protect the user that it actually requires a lot more work out of all of us. You can't just download it and expect it to notify you. You actually have to be prepared to notify it if you get a confirmed case so that it lets everyone around you know.
Those inside the schools are working hard to serve their communities during this unprecedented time.
Denver 7's Russell Haythorne has one such example of a DPS school in West Denver rising to meet a unique challenge this Thanksgiving week.
At Excel Academy in Denver.
We're making the best out of a bad situation.
The annual Thanksgiving meal.
Do you mind if I open this up?
For teachers, students, and their families.
People need this. Yeah, happy Thanksgiving.
Looks a little different this year.
I'm sure a lot of families could appreciate it since a lot of hard times, you know what I mean?
Rather than serving up dinner in the cafeteria, the space has become a distribution center for dozens of meals to go home with families.
So many people came together and brought donations all week long.
It was a whole community effort that came together.
Hi there. Principal Cynthia Navarro says two businesses in particular, Raymond's Painting and the Abbey Collection Realty, made it all happen.
And we get to do the fun part and actually hand it to the families. It just means a lot.
We didn't get a hammer or nothing as far as going shopping or nothing because we just haven't had the money for it.
Thank you.
Excel is an alternative high school for at-risk kids in West Denver.
Any student who needs a different path.
I will tell you, our students are brilliant and they have so much going for them. It's good to see you.
A community supporting its own with a new tradition.
There's a lot of need for things like this out here, especially in 2020.
At a time when so many are in need.
Won't go hungry with this going on. Happy Thanksgiving.
Russell Haythorne.
It looks very good, especially that pumpkin pie.
Denver 7.
The �XL Academy also plans an annual Christmas meal for its community. They are in the process of reimagining that as well. And
in
parents.
A tweet Monday, Governor Doug Ducey says a coronavirus vaccine rollout could begin as early as next month, putting rubber to the pavement when it comes to the massive logistical plans to deliver it efficiently.
I really need to know how the supply is going to be for me.
Dr. Janice Johnston with Redirect Health is one medical group already approved to provide vaccines once they're available, greenlit to inject one stored at sub-zero temperatures like the vaccine from Pfizer.
Are they going to become prepackaged where it's already in the syringe, ready to go? Will they come in one-dose vials, single multi-dose vials that we'll need to draw up? We don't really know.
Details that could impact her plan to get it to as many people as possible. According to AZDHS, more than 500 providers throughout Arizona's 15 counties have already applied to help deliver the vaccine.
It may be a pharmacy in a particular area, it may be a clinic, it may be a health system or a physician's office, depending on the situation.
Kelly Fine is the CEO of the Arizona Pharmacy Association. She says mass immunization events and larger hospitals will play the primary role in the first round of
Testing wastewater for signs of the coronavirus. Several cities and towns in Indiana are doing just that in hopes of getting ahead of the virus.
Yeah, Muncie, one of those cities. ITMate's Richard Essex went there to see how it's working.
The city of Muncie has been tracking the coronavirus in wastewater from the city and from the Ball State campus since August. They say that they're able to get ahead of the virus before people even get tested. Inside these plastic bottles is wastewater collected this morning from 3 sites on the Ball State campus and 1 from the wastewater plant in Muncie.
People will generally start shedding the virus in their waste up to a week before they start to show symptoms or may even seek an individual test. So if we're able to identify those people early, that gives healthcare professionals some advanced warning, some time to respond.
3 times a week, wastewater samples are pulled from a device that looks like a trash can that's been turned upside down. The machines and testing are paid for by a grant from the Indiana Finance Authority. Muncie is the only city with a university that is participating in this program. Universities are considered a potential coronavirus hotspot.
It's a great way to track. It's very unbiased. It doesn't matter if your community particularly is struggling with the number of individual tests available or people don't want to go in.
Conrad says there are some weaknesses in the testing. The samples can become diluted with too much rain or too concentrated with too little. When Muncie started testing back in August, the numbers were high. Students had just come back to campus. But since then, the numbers have leveled off. The numbers in the city of Muncie have gone up and down and not shown the steady rise in cases that we have seen statewide. Wastewater testing for the virus and other infectious diseases is a relatively new tool for community healthcare professionals.
This is going to continue. I think you're going to see more work like
is
this done
on.
in the future.
3 weeks from last Friday, the FDA is expected to okay the first round of immunization shots. Alabama already knows how many doses it will get.
Alabama's first allotment has been very tentatively identified as being around 112,000 doses. That number is not a hard and fast number, and it could change. It could be significantly lower.
First in line to receive the most highly anticipated vaccine in about a century, high-risk healthcare workers, especially those who treat coronavirus patients. Less clear is when the drug will be available to the general public. Right now, guidance for pregnant women and children is less concrete.
None of these first 3 vaccines have enrolled enough pregnant women or children in order for FDA to make recommendations about use in those groups.
And while some have expressed concern about trying a new vaccine, Dr. Scott Harris says he is ready when it's his turn and reminded the public the life-saving shot in the arm will not cost you a dime.
There's no charge for these vaccines. They're being given free to the states, and so there won't be a charge to people for this.
Dr. Harris says the state of Alabama is scheduled to be ready to distribute the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer by December the 7th and fully expect to receive the green light to do so.
Through the end of the year, Oregon landlords can't evict people who can't pay rent, but they can come the new year, unless Oregon lawmakers extend the eviction moratorium.
We have 2 topics today. One, the proposal on the eviction moratorium.
Monday, a housing committee heard a proposal to extend that ban.
The legislature allocated over $60 million.
Renters impacted financially by the pandemic couldn't get evicted for not paying rent until June 30th, but they'd have to pay missed rent the following day. The proposal requires tenants fill out a declaration saying they're dealing with financial hardship tied to the pandemic.
But there's a lot of landlords that maybe don't have our financial resources that are really struggling right now. And, it's tough. And the discussion needs to, from our leadership, needs to be how do we help those folks maintain?
At least $100 million from the state's general fund would go toward helping both renters and landlords, with most allocated to a new landlord compensation fund.
We heard today
that from all sides that $100 million is not enough to fully address the issue.
Property owners could get 80% of back rent they're owed by applying for rent assistance on behalf of their tenants.
They're on the right track as far as paying landlords directly and making sure that these people are being made whole.
We don't want tenants to end up in a situation where they just owe their landlord a lot of back debt. And we know that we don't want landlords to lose properties that they own. We know we need rent assistance into our communities to truly solve this problem.
While many agree it's a good middle ground,
In both cases, it will benefit both parties.
And right now at 6, 3 companies could be nearing the finish line in the race for a COVID-19 vaccine. Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca all showing promise, but there are still questions about when and how any vaccine would get to you.
We do know that the state will be handling the distribution here in Texas. And tonight, Governor Abbott is revealing part of phase 1 of that plan.
Yeah, this phase outlines who will get the vaccine first. Channel 2's Jacob Rascone is live in the Med Center tonight with a closer look at the governor's plan. Jacob?
Yeah, Chris, today we learned that AstraZeneca is as effective as 90%. And we also learned today a detailed plan of exactly who will get the very first limited doses of any approved vaccines. Phase 1A of the Texas vaccine distribution plan outlines exactly who qualifies for the very first limited doses of COVID vaccines. Hospital staff who work directly with patients who are positive or at high risk for COVID are at the front of the line, Tier 1, as well as long-term care staff working with vulnerable residents, EMS providers who respond to 911 calls, and home health care workers in direct contact with vulnerable and high-risk patients.
Breaking news now at 4, Joe Biden gets a green light from the Trump administration. The General Services Administration says Joe Biden is the apparent winner of the 2020 election. Hello, everyone. I'm Juan Fernandez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susie Sa. The decision clears the way for Mr. Biden's formal transition now to the presidency. Officials say the decision was made after the Trump administration failed in efforts to overturn votes in key battleground states.
That's right, like Michigan and Pennsylvania. And earlier today, Susie, President-elect Biden announced several members of his cabinet, including selecting longtime aide and diplomat Tony Blinken to be his Secretary of State. President Trump has yet to concede, but took to Twitter today to acknowledge the GSA's decision. The president tweeted, "Nevertheless, in the best interest of our country, I am recommending that the GSA administrator and her team do what needs to be done with regard to initial protocols and have told my team to do the same."
It's definitely too soon to see a trend. My worry, Todd, is that we go like this and we have a little leveling off and everybody gets together in Thanksgiving and we go back up. That would be a really dire situation for our community.
Dr. Dave Williams is the Chief Clinical Officer for Unity Point. He says the latest COVID numbers have been moving in the right direction in the past few days, but warns that family gatherings during Thanksgiving could reverse that trend because COVID thrives when people get together.
A time for cautious optimism, with the key word being cautious. Like we've been saying, what we do this week with a big holiday coming up, what we do this week is going to impact those numbers dramatically.
This car parade around the State House is sending a similar message. The national group is called the Poor People's Campaign. It was started by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. The Iowa chapter wants to remind us that COVID-19 hits poor people harder than others, and that it's up to everyone to do their part.
And it's just a shame that we're not doing more to protect each other and to protect everyone else.
Believe me, I'm really tired and fatigued too of always wearing a mask, always staying 6 feet apart from everybody. But
Live pictures from SAC International right now. We are getting word a plane just made an emergency landing. According to a flight tracking website, it was an Alaska Airlines flight that may be the tail of the plane right there in the distance. We're hearing this Alaska Airlines flight from Vegas to Seattle had to make the emergency landing here in Sacramento because there was heavy smoke. We're tracing this information right now, seeing what more we could find out. The plane has landed safely, but as soon as we get more information, we'll bring it to you.
Who have tested positive for coronavirus and who have isolated themselves for 2 weeks could be offered a so-called freedom pass for at least 90 days, which would allow them to return to normal life. Scientists believe that though it is possible to catch coronavirus again after being infected, this is extremely unlikely, and especially so in the first few months after infection. According to government scientific advisor Professor Sir John Bell, this scheme would create an incentive for people to be tested and would help to end lockdowns. Bell suggested that mass regular testing should be introduced, meaning people who wish to do so would be tested every couple of days. If they maintain negative results, they should be allowed to get back to normal activities, including using public transport, going to sporting events or the cinema. The government has come under fire for introducing lockdowns without a clear exit strategy. A freedom pass scheme could become part of this strategy to get Britain back to normal life. However, some have criticised this suggestion as it may incentivise people to attempt to catch coronavirus in order to gain a freedom pass. Another important part of ending lockdowns will be the rollout of a vaccine for the virus. Earlier this week, Pfizer announced their vaccine had proved 90% effective and 50 million doses would be available by the end of this year worldwide if regulators give the green light. However, Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam played down vaccines as the cure to the pandemic.
Because the one thing we know about these vaccines at the moment is that they will prevent illness due to SARS-CoV-2, due to the COVID-19 virus, as diagnosed by PCR. That's all we know. We do not know yet if these vaccines will prevent asymptomatic infection, and therefore we do not know if these vaccines will prevent virus shedding and therefore have an effect on community transmission.
Tankları götürecek. Ekrem dayı sizin yukarıda hiçbir şey kalmadı ha. Almadı. Şey koptu. Bak direkt devrildi. Direkt devrildi. 132 kaçta geliyor? Geçti ya. Gitti o tarafa. Ne geçmedi? İyi geçti. Dönüp geliyor. Aman Allah. Yemekhaneye gitti. Dolulara bak dolulara. Ne varsa şöpte attı. Anam.
وبالتحديد We're going to putt? Single file, single file, single file. Thank you. Single file, 17 coming out. What are we doing? Single file, single file. Follow their directions. Where is it? Come on. You're okay. Come on. Come on. Come on. Hold my hand. Hold my hand. You're okay. Come on. Just keep your hands up. Yep, thank you. Just keep walking. Follow everybody else. Thank you. Come on. It's okay. Keep your hands up. Thank you. You got it. You got it. You're okay. Did you come by yourself? You can put your hands down, just follow through. Standing over there. You guys just keep following. We're going to have you all wait back here for a few minutes until we can get you down. All right. Thank you. Right.
Heard encouraging news from two of the frontrunners who are developing a COVID-19 vaccine, both using genetic technology that's never been used before. Circle of Health reporter Denise Sedora breaks down the science behind several different vaccine candidates.
Weakened or inactive virus vaccines grown in eggs or cells are what we're used to. Now, COVID-19 is about to take us to a whole new level in genetically engineered vaccines.
The mRNA is really a novel strategy.
Vaccine researcher Dr. Eric Dar says Pfizer and Moderna's mRNA approach sends an instruction manual to your cells, telling it to churn out a protein normally found on the coronavirus.
It gets injected into your arm, and then that will get expressed on the surface of the cell, and the immune system will respond.
Phase 3 results look promising, and because mRNA are just chemicals, they can be manufactured rapidly.
I was put here to do a job, and Pfizer and others were way ahead on vaccines. You wouldn't have a vaccine if it weren't for me for another 4 years, because FDA would have never been able to do what they did, what I forced them to do. And Pfizer and others even decided to not assess the results of their vaccine. In other words, not come out with a vaccine until just after the election. That's because of what I did with favored nations and these other elements.
With Donald Trump telling Americans it happened on his watch.
Joe Biden on the coronavirus disaster he's set to inherit in 65 days.
We're going into a very dark winter.
And on COVID planning if Donald Trump keeps blocking the presidential transition.
More people may die if we don't coordinate.
As the US crosses 250,000 COVID deaths, new hope. First, Pfizer, now drug maker Moderna, has released impressive trial figures for a potential COVID
gives
vaccine.
Emergency authorization to the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine in the coming weeks. Will you get vaccinated? And if you're hesitant, why should any American have confidence in the vaccine?
Well, first of all, we'll see if that comes forward. And secondly, it's important that people who are in the greatest need get it. I wouldn't hesitate to get the vaccine. But I also want to set an example. But I wouldn't hesitate to get the vaccine if, in fact, Dr. Fauci and these two organizations, whether it's Moderna or Pfizer, who have been extremely responsible, conclude that it is safe and able to be done. Look, the only reason people question the vaccine now is because of Donald Trump.
Down again. In some places that's already happening. If you have kids, you've seen it. Joe Biden has promised more of it. Masks and quarantines, limits on travel, restrictions on who you can eat with, who you can touch and how. The most intimate details of our lives completely controlled by our leadership class. The people who used to scream at politicians, "Keep your hands off my body," aren't saying a thing about this. In fact, they're encouraging it. So the question is, what exactly is this about? It's not about science. If masks and lockdowns prevented spikes in coronavirus infections, we wouldn't be seeing spikes in coronavirus infections after 9 months. But we are seeing them. So clearly the geniuses got it wrong once again. This time they're not even bothering to point to legitimate scientific studies to support continuing their policies, because there aren't any studies that support that. So what is going on? Catholic Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has some idea, has thought about it. Vigano is one of the truth tellers in his church. He made himself deeply unpopular several years ago with many in the hierarchy by exposing their complicity in decades of sex abuse. They hate him for it. But Vigano is 79 years old, and in the way that older people stop caring what others think, he really doesn't care. So instead he says what he thinks is true. A few weeks ago, he wrote a letter to President Donald Trump assessing the lockdowns from a perspective you almost never hear in this country. No one, up until last February, Vigano wrote, would ever have thought that in all of our cities, citizens would be arrested simply for wanting to walk down the street, to breathe, to want to keep their businesses open, to want to go to church on Sunday. Yet now it is happening all over the world. The fundamental rights of citizens and believers are being denied in the name of a health emergency that is revealing itself more and more fully as instrumental to the establishment of an inhuman, faceless tyranny. End quote. Now, you may not have heard those words before, and there's a reason for that. The usual foot soldiers for conformity in our news media did their best to suppress and discredit Vigano's letter to the president. Yahoo News tried to tie the elderly clergyman somehow to QAnon, which to them made sense. He alleged that a global health emergency was being used by the people in power for ends that had nothing to do with the virus itself. And of course, that's crazy talk. It's a conspiracy theory, Russian disinformation, probably racist. Better pull it off the internet right away. Censor those ideas before they infect the whole country. That's the media position on that. The only problem is that what Vigano wrote is actually true. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is factually accurate. Watch this video from September. You may not have seen it. It wasn't played much in this country. This is the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, speaking to the United Nations.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Oh, this is our chance, says Justin Trudeau. Not our chance to save you from a virus with a 99% survival rate. You'll almost certainly be fine, and they're fully aware of that. This is our chance to impose totally unprecedented social controls on the population in order to bypass democracy and change everything to conform with their weird academic theories that have never been tested in the real world and, by the way, don't actually make sense. This is their chance. Quote, this pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset, end quote. Keep in mind, that's not from QAnon. That is a head of state talking. And he's not alone. Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum. Schwab has written a book called COVID-19, The Great Reset. The book isn't really about science or medicine. No. Instead, it describes, quote, what changes will be needed to create a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable world going forward, end quote. What changes is Schwab talking about? We don't know. What we're certain of is that you're going to pay for them, and the people in charge will benefit from that. Great Reset is coming. The richest people in the world are behind it completely. Bill Gates supports the Great Reset. What will the Great Reset look like? Well, there will be no live music in the Great Reset. Choirs will be illegal unless they are singing the praises of Kamala Harris. According to CNN, Christmas will be banned. Sorry, put on your mask and spend the holidays alone. Good luck. So how long can this all continue? This weird and yet weirdly recognizable combination of hypocrisy and authoritarianism. Well, it's hard to imagine it could go on forever. In his letter last month to the president, Archbishop Vigano wrote this, and it's worth hearing, quote, "This great reset is designed to fail because those who planned it do not understand that there are still people ready to take to the streets to defend their rights, to protect their loved ones, to give a future to their children and their grandchildren." End quote. Let's hope that's true.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
President Trump is filing another appeal in Pennsylvania in his attempt to overturn the election. On Saturday, a federal judge told the Trump legal team that their claims of fraud were, quote, strained legal argument without merit, end quote. Yesterday, they filed another appeal, though. Just before the ruling, Republican Congressman Mike Kelly filed a suit claiming a state law that allows for mail-in ballots is unconstitutional. He's also asking for the results to not be certified. Pennsylvania's Attorney General called the lawsuit, quote, another weak attempt to subvert the will of the people, desperate, hypocritical, baseless, end quote. President-elect Joe Biden has an 80,000 vote lead over the president.
Getting through the excitement of lifting restrictions, though, thousands of people took to the streets in Guatemala's capital city this weekend, demanding the resignation of President Alejandro Giammattei and protesting funding cuts to healthcare and education amid this pandemic and in the wake of two major hurricanes. The mass demonstrations were convened after the approval of the 2021 budget to address the serious damage caused by Hurricane Iota.
Public and private gatherings in Nashville will be limited to 8 people. Nashville Mayor John Cooper announcing the amendment on Thursday. Currently, up to 25 people can gather together in a group. Mayor Cooper has also announced all indoor extracurricular activities within Metro Nashville Public Schools will be paused until further notice.
A 15-year-old is being held in Wisconsin after a shooting at a mall in suburban Milwaukee. Police arrested him Saturday night. They say they also recovered the suspected weapon. The shooting happened Friday afternoon. Investigators say it stemmed from a fight between two groups. 8 people were injured, including 4 bystanders. Most have been released from the hospital.
And breaking news overnight, AstraZeneca announced late-stage trials of its COVID-19 vaccine were highly effective in preventing COVID-19. The drug maker says its experimental vaccine has an average efficiency of 70%, but a 90% efficiency when a half dose is taken and followed a month later by a full dose. No hospitalizations or severe cases of COVID-19 were reported in those receiving the vaccine.
Advisor of Operation Warp Speed says the first Americans could be vaccinated against COVID-19 as soon as December 11th.
We are ready to start shipping vaccines within 24 hours from approval, and hopefully people will start to be immunized, I would say, within 48 hours from the approval.
The FDA has announced a public hearing for Pfizer's request for emergency use authorization of its vaccine for December 10th. Company officials say it could be recommended for emergency use authorization that day. Moderna's vaccine will face the same review.
Angle warned you about what was coming. It's called the Great Reset. And this idea was first designed by the global elite at the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. Well, our timing could not have been better. At this moment, and certainly not getting the attention it deserves, Biden's piggy bank, Michael Bloomberg, is holding something called the New Economy Forum. Doesn't that sound fun? This annual summit brings together corporate CEOs, activists, UN officials, and your garden variety washed up politicians like Bill and Hillary Clinton. But they all have one thing in common: the shared goal of reorganizing the world so that assets are distributed more equitably, more fairly. And health security and so forth, climate change, all of it's part of it. And they're not even trying to hide their plans. This was Mike Bloomberg in his opening address to the forum.
As we meet, governments around the world are mobilizing trillions of dollars to address the economic effects of the pandemic. It's an unprecedented opportunity not only to repair the damage, but also to address the problems that existed before the pandemic hit.
And by problems, he really means your freedom and prosperity. And the solutions that Bloomy and his globalist groupies are proposing all involve more centralized control over your life, like how much energy you use,
Carbon must be given a price. The time of fossil fuel subsidies is over. We must phase out coal. Authorities must integrate the goal of carbon neutrality in all economic and fiscal policies and decisions.
Well, Joe Biden agrees with this. It's part of his platform, after all. Goodbye energy independence. Hello, Chinese solar panels. Bloomberg also invited his CCP buddies to make faux appeals for global unity.
We should build an open world economy that works for all. We must firmly safeguard the multilateral trading system under the WTO and unequivocally reject unilateralism and protectionism. When China does well, the whole world will benefit.
I feel like I've heard, though, this somewhere before.
A rising China is a positive development, not only for the people of China, but for the United States and the world as a whole.
You might not have liked Trump's tweets or sometimes his tone, but you're sure as hell going to miss his America First ethos and results. Joining me now is Victor Davis Hanson, Hoover Institution Senior Fellow. Victor, does any of this, what you just heard, surprise you?
Well, a little bit, because when Rahm Emanuel tried this, remember, 12 years ago.
Coronavirus cases continue to soar in California. Some residents of the state aren't happy with the new COVID-19 safety regulations. California Governor Gavin Newsom issued a stay-at-home order to begin last Saturday night to try and take control of the increasing numbers. Just yesterday, nearly 14,000 coronavirus cases were recorded in the state and another 60 deaths. But some people aren't too happy with the stay-at-home order that the Democratic governor issued, especially Trump fans who have taken to the streets after curfew kicked in at Huntington Beach to protest against them. Take a look.
Because half my face is ugly or something like that.
It comes just days after Gavin Newsom had to apologise to his California state after he was caught on camera dining at a confined indoor space without wearing a mask or social distancing. He was slammed by many people for contradicting what he's been asking Californians to do.
And as soon as I sat down at the larger table, I realized it was a little larger group than I had anticipated. And I made a bad mistake. Instead of sitting down, I should have stood up and walked back, got in my car and drove back to my house. Instead, I chose to sit there with my wife and a number of other couples that were outside the household. And you can quibble about the guidelines, et cetera, but the spirit of what I'm preaching all the time was contradicted, and I got to own that. And so I want to apologize to you because
considering shutting down indoor dining, citing a growing number of coronavirus cases here in the city. Now, the mayor tells us that's one of the options being considered at tonight's city council meeting, but stresses that no decision has been made at this time. This news comes at the same time that weather is turning colder and many restaurants may have to close their outdoor seating. Some restaurants taking to social media over the weekend saying without additional federal or state aid, they'll have to close for good. Live in Cambridge, Matt Reed, WCVB News Center 5.
efforts to rescue a deer in distress in the Long Island Sound. The deer was seen swimming around Saturday with a paint can stuck on its head. Workers circled the doe for about 20 minutes and finally managed to remove the can. They did eventually get the deer out of the water. It is now recovering at the Strong Island Animal Rescue. It's expected to be fine, but after this adventure, wow.
Deer's like, what a day. You know, first this paint can, now I'm in the water. I mean, come on. This could not be worse.
Thank goodness.
Near the water, a Florida man rescued his puppy from the jaws of an alligator. It was caught on video. This is the video here from the Florida Wildlife Federation. Richard Wilbanks says he was in the backyard with his little puppy Gunner, and he heard Gunner cry. And that's when Wilbanks saw the gator and jumped into action.
Oh, it was just a shock. It happened so fast that, instinct just took over.
And never dropped a cigar either. Wilbanks walked away with just a few cuts. Gunner's doing fine, and the gator has been...